in the US, we glorify suffering
Oof.
in a way that's low key perverse. And I'm done with that. Suffering does not win you any prizes. So I'm not here to do those things anymore.
Hi, everyone. This is Kerristen, and thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Relocate Podcast. I have with us today Adalia Aborisade. She is from Houston, Texas. She is a world traveler and money coach. She's dedicated to empowering women through financial education. She believes that everyone deserves to make confident financial decisions, and I love that because I'm like right there with you. And she is on a mission to help women take control of their finances so they can live life on their own terms. And she is definitely living life on her own terms right now, as she has lived in Mexico City, Mexico for over 5 years. Wait, let me make sure I got that right. Yeah, she's lived there for a total of 5 years. She also has experience living in Kuwait and Honduras. So we're going to have a wonderful discussion about all of this. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
That's good. All right. Well, let's get started. So I mentioned that you're from Houston, Texas. What was it like living there?
Um, I like being from Houston. Maybe not always Texas, but Houston is a different place than the rest of Texas. And so it is, I believe, the most diverse city in the United States. A lot of people think it's New York City, but it's actually Houston. So, it's for somebody who likes to travel, it's a great place to be from because you are already getting exposed to different kinds of food, different kinds of people, different religions, different celebrations. And so I always tell people, back in the day, Houston was not a place people often visited. It's not maybe the best place for vacation, but definitely a great place to live.
Gotcha. And I lived there for about 5 years. So I'm curious always when I run into someone who's from Houston, just curious to know how their experience was growing up because it's definitely different when, you're coming in, you're a transplant. And I didn't get to see that part of Houston. I only saw Houston after it was dressed up, and now there's all these different neighborhoods. And it's, I, I want to say Houston is the largest city in the South, if I'm not mistaken. I'd be quoting
That
stuff.
sounds about right.
I know.
Definitely in land area, possibly in population, but it is geographically a very big place. As much as I love Houston, I never liked the heat.
Ah, isn't it hotter in Mexico? Hold up.
Not in this part of Mexico. That is one of the reasons I live in Mexico
Oh,
City and not like Cancun or Puerto Vallarta. Like right now, I had to take off my sweater because it's actually very cool in the house. And that's because it's cool outside. We don't have air conditioning and heating. So not all of Mexico is
oh.
hot.
Thank you for telling me about that. It's just another reason I need to go visit because I'm tired of the heat too. It's fall, y'all, as of the time of this recording, but it's 93 degrees. I'm in Austin right now, so it's 93 degrees here, and I just know it's about the same in Houston. It's October. Why?
It was about 69 or 70 today.
Ooh,
Yesterday it was in the 50s.
ooh. Okay. Yeah, you did good. No, you did good, girl. No, you don't like the heat. Okay. Um, so Houston is now very diverse, and I'm curious to know. And Houston's also big. It takes like an hour to get from Houston to Houston. I don't know if it was like that for you when you grew up there, or the community that you were in. had all the diversity that there is now in Houston, but would you mind sharing what the community was like where you grew up and exactly what area of Houston you grew up?
I grew up in South Park, off of MLK in Belford.
Oh,
Went to the
yeah.
University of Houston. I went to high school. I went to high school downtown at Incarnate Word. And so while my neighborhood was not very diverse, very Black neighborhood, um, where I went to high school, because the girls who went to that school were coming from different parts of the city, there was a mix there. And then at the University of Houston, you literally had people from everywhere. Like this time of year, fall, that's when they're having all of the festivals. It's festival time in Houston. So there's the Italian festival, the Greek festival. And so while my neighborhood was not diverse, if you went to things in the city, you definitely could get a taste of other people's culture.
So, based on what you mentioned about like everybody in the community looks very similar to you, very Black, which I love. But I'm wondering too, what was the exact moment when you realized that maybe Houston wasn't the place that you want to be in anymore? Um, and if you didn't have that thought, could you share why you moved out of Houston?
Um, that's an excellent question. It's a couple of things. I have always wanted to live in another country. Like when I was younger, I thought it was going to be Canada, but that's a little too cold for me. I had hoped to study abroad, but that didn't work out for me. And I always wanted to learn another language, but life happens. And so all of that got pushed to the back burner, probably maybe until like my late 30s. And then I started to think about like that I really wanted to live like in the city center. I wanted to live someplace that was walkable, that had mass transit. I didn't want to have to own a car. And if anybody is familiar with Houston, it is very car centric. And
Hmm.
so when I looked around the US, I was like, where can I do that? Austin was an option. Austin is very different now than it was then. Um, New York City, but as a K-12 teacher, I couldn't afford to live there. And so I thought I probably can't have that vision of my life in the US. So I thought maybe I'd end up living overseas somewhere. But the actual like moment I decided to make that happen, because it was kind of always in the back of my head, probably was not too long after I turned 40. I had just gotten divorced and had a second chance at life and decided that my new life, I was going to do all of those things that I had always wanted to do. And I was like, well, I ain't got that man no more. Maybe I could move abroad. That coupled with, you know, kind of as I took stock during that time in my life, realizing that there were some values misalignments between me and the United States. And so I thought, well, I don't need to stay here. I need to go somewhere else.
Okay. And how, first of all, you look great, and I would have never guessed. Some people will probably be listening and not really seeing like the beauty. Like you look great. Okay.
Well, thank
Um,
you. Thank you.
yeah. So now I need to know, how old were you when that idea came to mind where you had an interest in moving out of the country?
Honestly, it has been there at least since high school, possibly before that. And I think that is one of the reasons I ultimately left, is because, you know, there always were some things that just made me feel like the United States was not the place for me. I didn't have the vocabulary to be able to explain that. But like I kind of alluded to, when I ultimately left, like there were some things happening in the national conversations. And I was like, if this is what it means to be an American, this ain't me. I don't feel like this. Like one thing that I often cite when people ask me why I left, um, there was this whole debate about Obamacare, and there were all these conversations about, like, is healthcare a privilege or a right? And I was like, I can't believe we having this conversation.
Right.
Healthcare is a right. And if this is what it means to be an American, that we don't think people deserve healthcare, this I don't want to live in a place like this.
I'm leaning towards that way. I really am. I mean, what happened to I feel like humanity just went out the window. Like that should be a human right. In my opinion, it should be a human right. And it shouldn't even be an opinion. It should just be a thing. you know, should be.
Yeah. A lot of it is capitalism, because why give someone a right when you can profit off of it? Um,
Yeah.
and I have some disagreements with that kind of thinking as well.
And I don't know about the trees in Mexico City, but I've read that 98% of the trees in the US are male trees. And that makes it difficult for um, the air to stay as fresh as it should be, and causes a lot of pollen
It also
issues. And
means they don't bear fruit. And that means poor people or people in need can't get food, because apparently food is not a human right either.
yeah, and
I
also
I don't I don't know much about trees, and so I've not really paid attention here. But like when I was in Valencia, Spain, all of the trees had oranges on them, like, and they were just there. You can go if you eat oranges, which I don't, but if you do, you just go and grab an orange, and it's no big deal.
you mentioned that your greatest takeaway was home not being always being the place where you were born. Starting to click now. What you mean by that? But we're gonna touch on that because I want to dive a little deeper.
Okay.
Okay, so you got to, you got to the point where you've done a lot of great things in life, fresh out of divorce. You don't have any kids, right?
No, I have two
You have
kids. I
two.
have three grandkids.
Oh, I love that. Oh,
Hmm.
okay. And when before you like left, like did they come with you when you left, or are they at the point where they're able to make their own decisions? How was that process of leaving?
The youngest, when I decided that I would leave, because initially, my kids are 6 years apart, and so the oldest was already out on her own. The youngest, my original plan was to wait until she got out of high school, and then the more I thought about it, was like, why do I have to do that? And so she was 15 at the time, and I proposed it to her. I said, look, this is what I am going to do. I'm going to look for a job abroad. I said, I haven't made up my mind about what country I want to live in. And I'd like you to come with me. If there's a particular country you'd be interested in living in, like, I can apply for jobs there. And she was like, no, thanks. I'm not interested. That's great. Go do your thing. I'm going to stay here. But she eventually changed her mind, actually, after I had already accepted a position. And I, one of the ways that I explained it to her, or pitched it to her rather was it could be like doing study abroad for a year. Like I was planning not to come back, but I understand at 15, like you may not be down with that. And so I was like, you can come with me for a year, learn Spanish. It was a international school that used U.S. curriculum, so she still would have to take things like U.S. history and that different kind of stuff. So I was like, you can do it for a year. And she eventually changed her mind and she came with me. This is when I moved to Honduras.
Okay.
And she had a ball. She had a great time and struggled with, because she was involved in some extracurricular activities when we lived in Texas that she couldn't do in Honduras. And so that was ultimately the reason she decided to return to Texas after a year. But it wasn't like an automatic thing. She had such a great time, made lots of cool friends, and was really thinking like, well, maybe I will stay, but ultimately decided to go back after a year.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. At first I was like, "Ooh, I hope I'm not prying," but I'm happy that you shared because I have some mommy friends. Once I told them about you being on, they were like, "Oh my gosh!" And they asked, and I about, does she have children? Yeah. I may need to do some research on Honduras as it stands right now. The Global Peace Index. That's just a list that I think it has 163 different countries, and those countries are rated by safety, any type of terrorist attacks, a lot of healthcare, level of healthcare, all these different things that ties into human well-being. And America is so number one is like safest, and 163 is oh my gosh, what in the world is happening? America sits at 134, so I'm curious to see where Honduras sits. I'm sure that it's above the U.S. because what are the odds when America's
I
134?
mean, Honduras is a country. Honduras is a country that definitely has some struggles, but the people there were some of the kindest people I have ever met in my life. Despite the fact that I didn't speak Spanish, people were very kind and very welcoming. So
I love that.
I, it's not a place that I would live long term. And I knew that when I took the position. I knew that was not going to be my place. Because again, like I told you, I was looking for a place that would be walkable, that, would have mass transit, and that's not something they have at this point.
Gotcha. So Honduras was a landing point to get your feet wet in that world of
Get out.
teaching to get out. Gotcha. Get out. Okay. Let's see. What else did I want to ask about Honduras? Ooh, I do have a question about your teaching role because I think that's pretty cool that you were
Okay.
able to land that. What resources and is the resource still available that you used to obtain that role?
I don't know that it is.
Okay,
Um, I had just made the decision because when I decided, okay, because I really didn't want to teach anymore, but I realized that that would be an easy way for me to get out of the United States just to take the job that I was already doing. And I had been kind of open to anywhere, or so I thought, because at the time, this is when the Middle East was paying really, really well. A lot of people were going there, a lot of people were going to China. And I couldn't get enthusiastic about either of those destinations, although ultimately I ended up being in both of them. Um, and the thing that kept coming back to me was that I really wanted to learn Spanish. I took Latin and French in high school. So I had no Spanish at all. So I really wanted to learn Spanish. So I was like, okay, I guess that means I need to find a job in Latin America. There happened to be a teacher international school job fair being held in Houston
Wow.
like the next month. And so I signed up and I went to that. And the very first school I talked to when I walked in was the school from Honduras. The position they had, it was as if someone had looked at my resume and created a position for it because I taught social studies, geography, but I had also spent some years working in instructional technology. And they were looking for somebody to be the director of their instructional technology program, but they also needed somebody to teach an AP class. And I taught AP Human Geography. So it worked out.
Okay.
They had been looking for somebody for over a year. And then they saw me and were like, oh my gosh, you're perfect for this job.
I love that.
And so there are still job fairs for teachers. And, you know, a lot of the resources still exist. But that particular one, I don't think it does anymore because the two guys who put it on professionally, I think they've had a falling out.
Oh, we hate to see that. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Was Honduras the only country that you pursued education in? Or pursued like a teaching role in?
No.
Okay.
After I was in Honduras, I took a year off and ended up taking a teaching job in Kuwait. That job was not great. I left early because in this part of my life, I do not spend time doing things I don't enjoy. And I did not enjoy working there. When it comes to working in Kuwait, the quality of your experience is directly tied to the quality of your employer. And my
Oof.
employer was horrible. So I left and ended up with a job in China. And so I taught in China for a year and a half.
Okay. I hate you had that experience, by the way. But I'm glad that you set boundaries for yourself and you found another opportunity. I love that. Okay. Uh, would you mind sharing any differences that you noticed between teaching in the US versus teaching in Honduras versus teaching in Kuwait, even though it wasn't a great experience, and in China? Because I'm curious. When I spoke to Candace, she wasn't biggest
Mhm.
fan of teaching in the United States, and now she's in Mexico City. She had an opportunity, or had like she's teaching, and she doesn't have to worry about, oh, let me raise this money so my students can have supplies like they do in the US, like teachers have to do in the US. So if you can just provide any insight regarding that.
I will preface my response by saying I taught in public education in the United
Okay.
States. So, you know, what happens in private schools, I don't know about. In a lot of ways, teaching abroad was better, primarily when it comes to work life balance. A lot of people don't realize that teachers, people think, oh, teachers get the summers off. No, we only get paid for 9.5 months of work. We're off in the summer and we're not getting paid. We get paid very little and we have to come out of our pocket for a lot of things. And we're often met with students who are apathetic about learning and unsupportive parents. And so going into an international school situation, one, those people have paid a lot of money for their children to be there. Almost all of the parents are like very invested in their children's education. They want them to do well, but the workload on teachers significantly less outside the US. So that like I worked in K-12 in Texas for 19 years. I'd never experienced any kind of work-life balance until I went abroad. And then it was like, well, yeah, school is over. You can leave. You weren't expected to do all of this extra. But the other part of that is many international schools. Well, no, let me change that. When parents are paying for their children's education, they expect really good grades.
Mm.
And depending on the culture of the country, how the parents respond, it might be, okay, well, can we organize some tutoring? We will pay you to tutor our kid. But then there are some cultures where it is, my kid likes you. You like my kid. My kid should be making a 100, right? And then there are some other cultures where if the kids don't perform well, they are met with really punitive punishments at home. So I will just say, my students tended to be more enthusiastic outside of the US. Now, teaching in the Middle East, particularly teaching boys, has its own challenges. And I'm never
Okay.
going to make that sound good because it was not. It was not. It was worse than I had even thought it was going to be.
Why was it different between the boys and the girls? I'm curious.
Well, you've got to remember Kuwait is a country where there are like different entrances for men and women. There are different waiting rooms for men and women. Like this is not a place where equality between the sexes is a thing. And a lot of the boys have been indulged, have had no boundaries put on them. So, one of my requirements in taking this position was that I would not teach boys because I knew there were going to be discipline issues. And I told you my employer was not good. They led me to believe that I would be teaching all girls, and I got there, and that was not the case. Not only was I teaching boys, I was teaching junior high boys every day. The first 20, 30 minutes of class was stop hitting him, stop kicking him, come into the room, don't do that. And they just don't listen to me because as a woman, I lack authority.
Okay. Okay, I see why you. Next country, please. New country, me, please, because this is definitely like unnecessary. I mean, that's not, yeah, that's not right and shouldn't be right in any country. But oh gosh, okay. How long were you there in Kuwait?
A few months. I was
Okay.
there. I the day I arrived, there were some things said by the principal that made me think I should get a taxi, go back to the apartment, get my bags, and just leave. And for some reason, I was like, oh, you should give them the benefit of the doubt. Within 2 weeks, I knew I needed to leave. But being the traveler I am, one of the reasons I took a job in Kuwait was because of its location and how easy it is to travel from there to other countries. And so I was like, I'll wait till Christmas break to leave, but while I'm here, I'm gonna travel. And so every weekend, I was in a different country.
Okay. My geography was good until you mentioned Kuwait. I'm trying to help the followers out. I see it's
It's
next to
very
Iran.
small. It's
Okay.
on the Arabian Peninsula. It's very, very small.
I see now. Okay, it's nestled between Iraq and Saudi Arabia. Okay. Okay, and it's pretty dry. And I see. Okay.
Hot.
Hot. That's all the things you don't like. Okay. Cool. So you lived in, and we didn't even touch bases on Mexico yet, but I'm wondering, I'm a huge mental health advocate. I just want to know, how did you manage the stress of moving between different countries? Like we're
For
like
me,
yeah. No, go
for
ahead.
me, that part wasn't stressful.
Okay.
Even though when I moved to Honduras, my employer paid for that move. They took care of the flights, they took care of the visas. I had a couple of boxes shipped. They paid for that. And I didn't when I decided when we decided to part ways because there was some changes, fundamental changes to how they wanted to do things that did not vibe with the contract I had signed. And I said, oh, no, thank you. And so that meant my next move I was going to have to do. And so, it is more difficult when you're the one having to figure out how to get your stuff to the next country, having to qualify for a visa on your own, all of that. But the actual logistics of it is not a big deal because I had downsized my life to basically fit into three checked bags. And so if that's all you're moving, that's your two included bags plus one extra. That's an easier way. What is it they say about traveling light? That was a much easier way to move around. Probably more of a concern, particularly, let's say, in Kuwait and in China, where don't speak the language and it's not a language that uses the same alphabet as English. So there were fewer things that I could take care of on my own because I can't just type in the word into Google Translate because I can't even read what that word is.
Kuwait and China, when it comes to women's rights, is it similar? I'm trying to think of
Well,
which
in
country.
Kuwait, in Kuwait, women have fewer rights. In China, nobody has any rights.
Okay, still not still not good. Oh, it's not funny, but
Here's here's
it's
the
crazy
thing.
how.
I'm not ever gonna sugarcoat my experience in these places. I had technically visited China before I took the job there. Some years before, I'd spent a week in Beijing, and then a couple of years later, a school I worked at in Texas had a sister city relationship with a school in southern China. Their kids had come to our school, and then a group of teachers took some of our kids to their school, and I was chosen to do that. And
Okay,
so I had these two experiences. I knew China was not a place that I was going to enjoy. I knew that, but I took the job anyway. And the job itself, for the most part, was fine. But I never forgot that that is a country with an authoritarian government that imprisons people without cause, that monitors everyone because there are cameras everywhere. Like, I never forgot that. Um, and I think that's something important to remember if you're thinking about living in another country, is to remember that every country's got their own government, their own way of doing things, their own laws. And you being an American doesn't really matter, particularly like as a Black American. Like, I don't know that that's going to save me if something were to go wrong.
gosh, I didn't even think about that part. It's already difficult being Black in America. I can't imagine being in a different country, depending on that country, and the judgment, the possible judgment. Was there anything that you enjoyed about being in China? Ah,
That is a good question. And let me think.
oh boy,
Um, I
we have
like
time.
noodles. So there
Ah,
was there was a Muslim noodle shop very close to where I lived and worked. And so that was something that I could eat. I knew how to order it. It was affordable. Um, I'm trying to think, is there anything else I liked about China? Not really.
okay. That that program that you did. Actually, my questions are going to be all over the place right now because now, so
Okay.
Yeah, because you might be the first person I've spoken to who mentioned having to actually foot the transactions that came with relocating. So before we even talk more about China, I want to know how much that costs. I want to know was what type of transactions were involved for you to get from Kuwait to China. I know every country is different, so it might not apply to other countries, but I don't know. There might be somebody interested in moving to China. I don't know who,
Well, both.
but
Well, okay. I was going to say, I think Kuwait has a tourist visa. I don't know what tourists would go there to see because there ain't much there. But China is a place that you don't really, you can go as a tourist on vacation, but you can't just say, oh, I'm going to move to China and go. It doesn't work like that there. The once you arrive, you have to register with the police for within 24 hours, that kind of thing. Like they're keeping tabs on you. The way many Americans come to Mexico and they do not have the legal right to live here, but they do anyway, that doesn't fly in a place like China. So going there, my employer um, got me like the invitation letters and all of that to apply for the work visa. Luckily, this is another good thing about Houston because of its prominence in international business. There are a lot of consulates in Houston. So, both when I was applying for the visa for Kuwait, the work visa, and for China, I didn't have to go somewhere else. I didn't have to mail off the paperwork to apply. Actually, I take that back. I did have to go. I went to California for Kuwait because I was trying to speed up the process. But like I took care of the visa process in the US. My employer reimbursed that.
okay.
Um, and then they covered flights, you know, and they covered my rent. Both places I got furnished apartments. Like my apartment in Kuwait was a 2 bedroom. My apartment in China, I think, was a 3 bedroom. Um, you know, what else? And you get like a settling in allowance where they give you some money, so that you can like get your cell phone turned on and, buy a few of the things that you need to like start life there. When I moved myself to Mexico. And that means that when I apply for residency, I paid for that. I had to qualify based on my financial situation, not because I had a job.
Okay.
And so, again, this is where traveling light paid off because, again, I did not have super high costs in getting my bags here. So, yeah, I mean, I think those are the costs that people need to consider. uh, the visa costs. And depending on what kind of visa are you getting, if it is a work visa, your employer should be paying for that. You should not be paying for that. You should not be paying to get documents like apostilled and all of that. The employer should be paying for that because
I
that
was
can be hundreds of dollars, if not thousands of dollars.
I was going to ask that too. I was wondering if that was just an added value of being in education. I wasn't sure if there may be other roles out there where international like people who live internationally can, move, or whether that was just a US thing. I think it's great that they're paying your rent and you've
Um,
been able to do that in multiple
Yeah,
places.
no, that when an employer, either when you're getting a job in another country and they are giving you that should be part of your package, or even if you work for a company in the US and they are like, "Hey, we need you at our office in Belgium." They should be covering those things.
Okay.
Um, Either they're paying for them outright or they're paying you some kind of stipend that covers those things.
Okay. Is it safe to say that if someone, let's say me, let's say I apply for a role in Mexico, I get the role, but they don't offer those added benefits, or those benefits that you mentioned, is it safe to say that that role is shady or that company is shady?
In Mexico, not necessarily,
Okay.
because when I left Honduras, I took a year off and I came to Mexico City, fell in love with it. And while I was here, a job opportunity, I was not looking for one, but one fell in my lap and they were going to give me or they gave me a work visa. First of all, it depends on how you're coming. If it is like I know someone who works for a like Fortune 500 company in Mexico. Not only did they pay to move the entire family here, not only did they pay their exorbitant rent because they lived in one of the fanciest neighborhoods in the city. They also paid for their kids to attend international school. And that's like 20, 30 grand USD a pop per kid. So it depends. It
Oh,
depends. Now, uh,
that's
so
not even college,
there are a
right?
lot
I'm
of
sorry.
people who are
That's
like,
wild.
there are a lot of people who are like, I want to move to Mexico. Can I find a job there? And there are a couple of things they fail to recognize. If it is like a Mexican business, one, wages are significantly lower here. Minimum wage here in Mexico is about $12 a day. And we're talking about probably at minimum a 12-hour day. So, one, the salary is not going to be what you think. If we're talking about a Mexican company, like my friend that worked for a Fortune 500, that's a different animal. Here's the other thing. Mexico, just like the United States, wants to protect jobs for their own people. So if a
Okay.
Mexican company is going to hire you, they have to, one, be approved by the government to hire people, foreigners. That costs money. They also have to prove that you have some special skill to do this job that they couldn't hire a local Mexican to do. And there is a limit to how many foreigners they can hire. So, this is why you don't find a lot of Mexican companies hiring foreigners, because it is an involved process, is an expensive process for them. So, if you got a job offer for a Mexican company here, it would not be unheard of for them maybe not to pay your rent or not to cover your flight because they might be like, look, we paying for the visa.
Okay.
But most other places, particularly you're talking about someplace in Europe, you're talking about someplace in Asia, you should not be coming out of the pocket for anything.
Did you live in any other country before you made it to Mexico City, or did you travel, relocated from China to Mexico?
It was initially my plan, but
Okay.
the pandemic happened. And
Oh,
so just getting out of China took a lot of work, and borders were closed. At that time, I already had residency in Mexico. So, getting out and trying to go someplace that may or may not have been letting in Americans didn't make a lot of sense. So, I went to Mexico where I already had residency and been pretty much been here ever since.
okay. I'm sorry. I think you did mention that earlier. You did about you took care of those expenses to establish residency in Mexico. Okay. But
Yeah.
you wasn't
Because after,
oh, I was thinking like, but you wasn't
what were you going to
like,
say?
yeah, like living in Mexico. right? Like you might
Correct.
be a little ignorant to
Um,
that process. Yeah.
after no, because my journey is a little convoluted. After Honduras, I lived in Mexico City for a year and really did not ever intend to leave, but I went back to work. And I
Okay.
knew at some point I would come back here. Ended up being in Kuwait, ended up being in China. And then because I went to China in 2019. So that summer, I was like, I'll spend my summer in Mexico. And while I'm there, I'll just go ahead and do my residency because I knew I could qualify on my own. And that way, that would just be one less thing I'd have to do. I assumed I'd go back to China, and then from China, I'd probably bop around Asia a little bit, spend some time in Eastern Europe, possibly move to Colombia, to Medellin. Um, but I knew eventually at some point I would end up back here. But then the pandemic happened and those plans went out the window
I see. Okay. But you've been in Mexico City for 5 years now.
in total.
Okay. In total. And overall, because I know you mentioned like pandemic happened, jobs not working out in China. You said, okay, it makes sense for me to go back to Mexico City. You loved it when you went to visit. You established residency. You're there now. Um, and you've been there for 5 years. Is it safe to consider that Mexico City is home? What does that look like for you?
For me, Mexico City is home.
Okay.
Um, it is, I know there are a lot of people for whom this city is not a place they enjoy. But for me, this is home. I would like to get residency in at least one other country, maybe two. I'm not pressed about it, but I'd like to do it. But so there could be a version where I'm splitting my time between Mexico and some other country. But I'm always going to spend some time here.
Okay. And okay, also pardon me for not like I kind of get the gist of residency. Is that's not the same as naturalization, right? Is that's just two different pieces to the pie, right? Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Because naturalization is you're becoming a citizen, you're getting a passport. Residency means I have the legal right to live here. It's kind of like in the US, you hear people get a green card.
Oh,
And
yes.
so they're
Okay.
not Americans, but they have lived there and maybe the right to work. Same kind of thing.
But how were you able to make it feel like home?
It felt like home the minute I got here. I did
Okay.
not have to do anything, which says a lot because I'd spent 41 years in the United States. And if I'm honest, it never really felt like home, not in the same way. So I got really lucky that I
Yeah.
came here and it turned out to be such a good fit for me. I think because I am the child of someone who was an immigrant to the United States from a young age, I was always aware of the fact that things could have turned out differently and I could have been born somewhere else. So that has always been there. And I
Mhm.
think from a young age, I understood it's just the lottery of birth. Just because you happen to be born in a particular place doesn't make you better or worse than somebody else. And so maybe that's where like my buy-in to like Americanness first started to falter. And like I mentioned before, right around the time I turned 40 and I'm redesigning my life and I'm thinking about like what do I really want my life to look like? How do I want to feel in that life? What kinds of things am I doing? And the values mismatch with American ideals and culture just become really, really evident. Now, I did not think Mexico would be such a great place for me because of my background teaching geography. I very much, like you mentioned, the what is it, the safety index. Like I looked at all those, like the gender index and the happiness, and I looked at all those things and I made this list of countries I thought would be a good fit. And Mexico was nowhere on that list. And had I just not ended up here after I left Honduras, I don't know that I would have ever realized that this place is, for me, it is very much a good place. Now, does that mean it doesn't have problems? No, that is not what that means. Every country has its issues, and it's really about, particularly if you are a person of color, if you are a Black person, it's really about finding the country whose crap you can deal with.
That last part, that made me chuckle. But it's true. I mean, it's just like living in the US, like, because, I mean, yes, we have a federal government, they can issue different laws, different mandates, but a lot of the times they tell us, oh, it's up to the states to decide what they want to do. So you may be like me and in Texas and liberal, and you hate the fact that women's rights aren't really appreciated here. Um, but then it just depends on the cities too, because the cities have their own laws and their
Yeah.
mandates, and like Austin's really pushing back on whatever the state is trying to do, and I love it here. I love them for that. Love Austin for that. Um, but at the end of the day, it's like you said, like you just have to find that place where you have what you want and the resources that you need to thrive, where it feels natural, where it feels right. Like this is the place that you're destined to be, that's feeding your inner child, but also knowing that you're somewhere with different laws that you can also deal with. It's a lot. It's a lot to think about. But I also think
Yeah.
that a lot of times people just kind of move and they don't think about that. They don't think about the politics. And I think that's important. It's a key to just stick a pen, write it down. If you're listening, like, hey, if you're ever thinking about relocating, even if it's within the US, especially if it's outside of the US, please think about the politics. Oh my gosh. Please consider that. Yeah. Speaking of inner child, how does your inner child feel right now? That teenage version of yourself that was eager to no longer be in the US, and you've had the opportunity to be in multiple countries.
Wow, I've never been asked that before. I don't know. I would imagine she is like, this is pretty much the life she dreamed about. It took us a while to get here, but yeah, this is very much the life that she dreamed about. And so I don't know about her, but I am happy that I ended up having an opportunity to give her that.
Yeah. And also you mentioned, oh gosh, what did you say? That you're no longer in the position to accept responsibilities that that doesn't align with your values. That's not exactly what you said, but that was like the gist. Like if it doesn't, if it's not treating you, if whatever opportunity leads to just a path of just mental and emotional despair, or just not delivering the energy that you need to thrive, that's not for you. I'm curious, at what point did you establish that boundary? Was it when you were in Kuwait or China, or when you got to Mexico City?
No, it was It was when I turned 40, which I was technically still living in Texas. There is something magical that happens when a woman turns 40.
Mm.
Like all of the lights go on, you have all these realizations. And I had lived up until that point so much of my life putting what I wanted third, fourth, 10th on the list, and subjugating my wants and needs and desires for everybody else's. And um, I had to come to the realization and face to face with the reality of living in that way was destroying me, and I was not happy. And I had a moment where I thought about the fact, I was like, if I died tomorrow, would I be satisfied with the life I have lived until this point?
Ooh.
And the answer was no. And so if that's the answer, then I got to do something about it. And really, and I would say like those last few months before I turned 40, um, is when I'm having these thoughts and these conversations with myself. And it was like, okay, so I can't live my life where I am tolerating people, places, jobs, countries that don't treat me well. Like I'm tired of that. And so things that were not serving me, I left, and decided that I wanted to live my life the way I wanted to live it on my own terms. I wasn't going to be pigeonholed in like, oh, well, you're a mom. This is what you're supposed to do. You've got grandkids. This is what you're supposed to do. Married women do this. No, I was going to do what I wanted to do. And there is nothing wrong with that. And so from then on, now you spend 40 years of your life not doing that. It doesn't just take immediately. There are times when I have to remind myself, like, girl, what are you doing? We don't stay in spaces that don't make us feel good, that we don't continue to do things or engage in activities that make us feel bad. And so that's like my rule that I live by. If I'm not enjoying this, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no, um, because however much time I have left here, I want to enjoy it. In the US, we glorify suffering
Oof.
in a way that's low key perverse. And I'm done with that. Suffering does not win you any prizes. So I'm not here to do those things anymore.
Oh man. I'm like just reaching that point.
It is
Trying not to cry.
something that, like, it's a bit of a soapbox for me, because so much of the way women are conditioned in American culture is about, you got to be selfless, and you've got to suffer, and you got to struggle. And no, we
Yeah.
don't. I could go on, but I'm not.
Another reason why I asked you about kids, um, like I have mommy friends who just want, like, they love to travel and they want more for themselves, and the only thing that they think is holding them back is, oh, I have and these are single mommy friends, like they just want a soft life. I have a friend, and I hope I can get her on this podcast, but she has been traveling back and forth between the US and Ghana. And she mentioned she has a beautiful baby, but he's not a baby. He's not a baby. I think he's like 5 or 6. Um, Anywho, she mentioned that they really admire children there. And it was so easy for her to just
The
still
the
do her. Oh,
US
go
doesn't
ahead.
like children. It really doesn't.
Yes.
I hope your mommy friends realize if they want to travel, they can take those kids with them. I have on my YouTube channel, I have interviewed so many Black women who travel with their kids. Before I left, before I moved out of the United States, my youngest was still living with me. And I was like, okay, this is where we're going. And here, I need you to plan the activities. Like, take those kids with you because it's actually going to benefit them so much to have those experiences. So that definitely shouldn't be something that holds them back.
Yeah. Oh, also you mentioned that, oh, at least when you first moved and you went to Honduras, and at the time your daughter was 15, and there was a school that I believe you said they it was kind of like a American setup. I might be butchering that.
Mhm.
Um,
They They had an
Curriculum. Gotcha.
American curriculum. So, yes. So the kids who were educated at this school, some of them were Hondurans. Some of them were like the children of people who worked at the embassy, that kind of thing. But their goal for the kids that went to the school was that they would go to university in the United States, in Europe, in Canada.
Okay. That's
So
interesting.
I know that that is one thing that moms worry about is like, well, okay, how am I going to educate these kids if I'm someplace else? And at the time, world schooling was not really an option for me, but it is absolutely like if I had a school age kid now, it is absolutely something I would look into. There is a version of this that when my grandkids get maybe like high school age, that they might like do a semester in the school system in whatever country I happen to be living in.
Okay.
Because my oldest granddaughter has visited here twice.
Okay. That's good to know. Okay, thank you. Okay. When you were in the US, you you mentioned you taught for about 20 years, I believe. And then you had like experience in um the countries that we mentioned beforehand. You moved to Mexico City. Uh, were you able to teach there as well? Are you still teaching there? I know we didn't mention that in the beginning, but like how were you able, like,
Um,
yeah. Let's just start with teaching first. Like at what
I,
point,
okay.
if you're not doing that
Um,
anymore?
I did not when I initially came to Mexico, I did not come here to work. I did end up getting a work visa, and it was to teach business English. There are a lot of like uh, I don't know what you call international Fortune 500 type companies, but a lot of global companies have headquarters here. And I worked at a language school that would contract with those companies like L'Oreal and Sanofi and, different places like that to have English classes in their building. And so that's what I did for a little bit. I didn't particularly enjoy teaching English. And when I left China, I had also decided that I was retiring from K 12 education. Didn't really know what I was going to do next. I just kind of was like, I'll try some things and be open to whatever. Like, if that meant I became a dog walker, fine. I didn't really care. Um, and one of the things that I had always thought about was helping women with their finances. When I was in Kuwait, witnessing all of these shenanigans that my employer was doing. And I noticed I had the means to leave on my terms. Like I didn't need the school to pay for my flight when I decided to bail. Um, but there were a lot of women I worked with who didn't have that kind of financial freedom. And that really stuck with me because, we just got through talking about the way women are conditioned. And we were talking about, how people are acting like women's rights are optional and that kind of thing. Well, one of the ways a woman can protect herself and give herself the most options is by handling her finances. And despite making so little money as a public school employee, I was able to, grow the little bit of money I had so that I had those options that when I looked up and decided I didn't want to be in Kuwait no more, I could leave. When my school in Honduras decided to restructure, and the new structure would have had me doing 2 and 3 times the amount of work, but for the same money, which was 60% less than what I made in Texas, I could say, no, thank you, and not look for a job, just take the year off. And so I really wanted to give that kind of freedom to other women. And so I ended up doing exactly that and kind of going into business for myself. And so that's what I've been doing the last 4 years.
Okay. Money coach and retreat host. Could you talk a little bit about what you do? You mentioned the like what inspired you to at least provide financial coaching to people, but yes, anything you want to add and how we can support you.
Well, a friend of mine that I met here, who also happens to be my roommate and is now my business partner, she is a life coach. And I think it kind of just came together because you can tell from talking to me that I feel very strongly about women's ability to move through the world freely and live in the way in which they want to. And one of the things when I first started my podcast, which is on hiatus now, that was one of the things that encouraged me to do that was because a friend of mine was like, other women need to hear this story. And, over the years, I've had women come to me and they're like, I am trying to make these big changes in my life so that I can really live it in a way that makes me happy. And so between my roommate and myself, we came up with this idea of creating a space where women who are trying to make changes in their lives, maybe that change is moving abroad, but maybe that change is, pursuing becoming an artist or, moving to a different state or whatever, but they're trying to make a change in their life. And it's often difficult for them to do that because the people that are already in your life, maybe they don't see why this would be a good thing for you. And so we wanted to give those women a safe place. We wanted to help those women. We wanted to give them community. And that is where our retreats, Reclaim the Retreat, came from. It's about helping women and femmes reclaim their peace, their happiness, their lives. And so I think the thing that sets our retreats apart is it because you hear about people going on like wellness retreats, writing retreats. This is more of a like a I guess, self development retreat, but it's also more than that because the locations that we choose, the companies we partner with, the kind of activities that take place are all around that theme of reclaiming. So, like, we do a retreat in El Salvador. El Salvador is right at a very pivotal time in its history where they're kind of reclaiming their identity. You talk to most Americans about El Salvador and they're like, oh, it's dangerous. There's a civil war. It's actually recently been named the safest country in Latin America. We just wrapped up a retreat in Oaxaca, Mexico, where we supported indigenous artists, visited numerous indigenous communities, worked with almost exclusively women owned businesses. So you get, community, you get coaching, but you also get to go and learn and experience the culture of another place. So it sort of brings together like all of my favorite things into one thing.
I love that. And I'm definitely going to make sure that when this is published, I mention all of your Instagram profile, your Facebook, your LinkedIn, your YouTube, and any information that I can obtain about your upcoming um, uh, events or retreats. I mean, and also how people can get in contact with you in general about
Okay.
financial coaching. So I think this is exciting, and I'm actually, I really just, I'm so glad that you were able to just share all of this and to go from teaching and working for other people and doing that in different countries to working for yourself and being in another country and doing that and just thriving. I love that. And I want that for me. I want that
I
for
want
me
that. I
so
want that
bad.
for everybody.
Uh,
I want that for you too.
okay. And very last question. It's a question that I ask everybody. Remember when we were mentioning, or we had the conversation about your inner child, or the teenage version of you who had an interest in leaving America. I keep saying America. The United States, because America can be Central America, it could be South America, it could be North America. Okay, um, United States, because I'm not about to give the U.S. all that energy. So teenage version of Adalia who is thinking about moving out of the United States. My question is, considering that version of yourself, now that you've relocated and you're happy and you've been in Mexico for 5 years and you have all this experience of traveling to other countries, other continents, what words of advice would you provide to that version of yourself, the teenage version of yourself?
I These are not going to be like grandiose words. That
That's
version of me
fine.
wanted to do study abroad. And it would have been my senior year in high school. And I opted not to because, like, it's senior year, prom, blah, blah, blah. And my advice to her would have been like, girl, go to France. That's what you need to do. Go to France. I would have told her not to put off this thing that she wanted to do.
But I'm glad you did it. I mean, it took some time, but you did it. And I know that it came at a time where you probably wasn't expecting it to happen, to occur, but you did it. I mean, you took that leap. You did that.
Yeah. And who would think something as simple as that? Like, I think we we don't think about happiness and being happy and what really makes us happy near enough. So I sort of revel in it now because so much of my life was spent and I was not happy. So yeah, it took me an extra 22 years to get there. But I got there eventually.
Well, thank you so much for joining today. I really appreciate your time. I mentioned earlier, but I'm going to mention this again for people who are listening that I know you enjoyed this conversation because you made it to the end. So I'm definitely gonna make sure that I highlight Adalia, her information, so you can connect with her and really get engaged with all the wonderful endeavors that she's pursuing right now. So um, definitely tune in every Wednesday because every Wednesday we're going to have more amazing stories. And with that being said, thank you for joining the Relocate Podcast.